Good afternoon. Hope all of you are doing well. We are going to be learning Maseches Sukkah Daf Mem Ches, a short daf, an interesting daf, and we are starting at a fresh Mishnah at the very top of Daf Mem Ches, Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. The Mishnah reads, HaHalel v'hasimcha shmone ketzad. In regards to Halel, Rashi says we're talking about a full Halel, and Simcha, Rashi here says we're talking about the Shalmei Simcha of eating the Korban Shlamim for 8 days. Ketzad, how does it play out? What do we learn from here? Kol Yemos Achad, that Shmini Atzeres also has a din of Simcha like all the other days of Sukkot, that absolutely that is going to be the halacha, that there's Simcha there as well, even though it's a different holiday and it has a distinct set of Mari Mekomos. So says the Gemara, how do we know that that's true? Minohani Mili, Titanu Rabban, the Brisa writes, quoting from the Pasuk, V'hayisa Ach Sameach. And what do we learn from that Pasuk? Lerabos, what does it come to include? That's it, Lerabos Leila Yom Tov Ha'acharon. This comes to include the Yom Tov Acharon, the second days, as we call them, of Sukkot, namely Shmini Atzeres. And the Brisa continues, O Einu El Yom Tov Rishon. Maybe we should have said the Pshat in the Pasuk of V'hayisa Ach Sameach is to teach us about Yom Tov Rishon, that there's a din of Simcha by Yom Tov Rishon, Mehechatesi, it's about Yom Tov Sheni. So it says the Gemara, no, Kshehu Omer Ach, when it says the word Ach, it's chilek, it separates from the beginning to teach us about the end. How did you decide what the word Ach should be? Okay, it's chilek, it's split, but how do you know still that it's going to be about the Yom Tov Acharon and not the Yom Tov Rishon? So it says the Gemara, Mar be'ani leila Yom Tov Acharon. The reason why I include the Yom Tov Acharon is because sheyesh simcha lefanav, because it follows days of Simcha, and you should be continuing your Simcha. Motzi ani leila Yom Tov Rishon, Yom Tov Harishon she'ein Simcha lefanav. So because of that, that flow of events, that because there were Yemei Simcha prior to the Yom Tov Sheni, so therefore, when the pasuk says V'yisach Sameach, it's coming to include, and that is the reason why we learn the pasuk the way that we do, and that is why our Mishnah says that Melamed, that we have the mitzvah of Simcha on Yom Tov Acharon Shalchat. Next Mishnah, almost halfway down Memches Medalef, the Mishnah writes, Sukkah Shiva Ketzad. What does it mean that the Sukkah is for 7 days? How do we show a line of demarcation between the days where there's a chiyuv of Sukkah and the day where there's no chiyuv of Sukkah? So the Mishnah writes, Gomar milechel, when one finishes their last suda on that 7th day, lo yatir es sukkah, so you should not take the Sukkah apart. Aval, what you should do is moridas hakelim min hamincha lemala. You should remove the kelim from the Sukkah, the kelim that you're eating with, the furniture, whatever it is, mibnei kavod Yom Tov Acharon Shalchag, to show the distinction for the honor of the Yom Tov Acharon Shalchag, where midoraisa at least there is no obligation at all to be in the Sukkah. So it says the Gemara halfway down Memches Amud Aleph, Ein lo kelim lahorid mahu. What if you're not able to show a distinction between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres by removing kelim? Let's say there are no kelim in the Sukkah. So it says the Gemara, what are you talking about? What did our Mishnah say? Look back at our Mishnah. Gamar milechel, when you finished eating, what were you eating with your bare hands, with no plates? Of course not. Says the Gemara, Ein lo kelim. What are you talking about? El ki ishtamesh, but my ishtamesh. When he had that last meal, where our Mishnah said Gamar milechel, he had to be eating off of something, so therefore it should be the case that he should have kelim there. So it says the Gemara, you're right. Of course, there are kelim. However, ein lo makom lahorid kelav ma'u. We're talking about a case scenario, an ukimta of sorts, where we're establishing our Mishnah that there was nowhere for you to put those kelim, whatever the logistics are, I don't know. So it says the Gemara, how then, if you have nowhere to take the kelim out of your sukkah, how then do we show the distinction between the days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres? Answers the Gemara, 2 answers. Rabbi Chia bar Rav, and according to some, it's Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Rabbi Chia bar Rav says, Amar poches ba'arba, we remove 4 amos of schach. We remove 4 tefach of schach, and that would invalidate the sukkah, and that will show you the distinction. We're not concerned about baltosif if there's no schach because it's not a sukkah anymore. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar madlik ba'esaner, and he says you should light a candle. This is a helpful answer because we learned that in small sukkahs, lighting a candle is unacceptable. We're supposed to light candles outside of a sukkah, not inside of a sukkah when it's small. So says the Gemara, below pligi, these 2 shitas are not arguing. Halon v'halahu, it depends where you live. In chutz la'aretz, you can't take apart the sukkah or invalidate it because, as we learned yesterday, that we still need to sit in the sukkah on the 8th day. So you can't do the schach move. That doesn't work for a chutz la'aretz in Bavel. Ma'ashein kain in Eretz Yisrael, that does work perfectly fine. So what do you do in Bavel? You light a candle. So says the Gemara, that only works a little bit. The answer of lighting a candle is with a sukkah ktana, where you can show a distinction of lighting a candle in the sukkah, because during sukkahs, if it's a small sukkah, you should not light a candle in a sukkah, as we learned earlier in the Masechta. Sukkah gedola ma'ikal meimar, but if it is a big sukkah and you're anyways allowed to light a candle, so then lighting a candle doesn't show any distinction that this is sukkahs and this is Shmini Atzeres. You are allowed to have a candle in a large sukkah no matter what. So answers the Gemara, you're right, the candle will not work in a larger sukkah. How then do we distinguish between sukkahs and Shmini Atzeres? And the Gemara answers, you bring kalim into the sukkah, showing, which is not a normal thing to do. If you're not having a meal, you bring kalim in there. And that then shows that you're not using this for the mitzvah of sukkah, therefore creating our line of demarcation between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. Says the Gemara, how would we know this is true? Da Amar Rava, Mani Mechla Bar Mimatlalta, that in general on Sukkot, the kalim should be outside of the sukkah when you're not using the sukkah. So if you're bringing them in, you're showing it's not sukkahs anymore. And Rava finishes his statement, though not relevant directly to today's comment here, which is Mani Mishsiya. If you have cups and glasses and pitchers, that's bimatlalta, that's okay. So that's why what we would do if it was a larger sukkah, where lighting a candle would not create the distinction between sukkahs and Shmini Atzeres. We would therefore bring kalim into the sukkah, thereby showing it's no longer sukkahs, thereby showing a distinction between Shmini Atzeres and sukkahs. Next Mishnah, almost at the bottom of the page, Nisuch Hamayim Ketzad. How did the Nisuch Hamayim work in the times of the Beis HaMikdash? Sluchis Shel Zav Machzekes Shlosh Lugim. The Tanna Kama writes that there was a pitcher of sorts that held 3 lug. It was the money was the water, was drawn from a spring. Higiu l'shar hamayim. Then they'd come to a gate in the Beis HaMikdash referred to as shar hamayim, because the nisuch hamayim was brought through these gates. And tiku v'hariu v'tiku, they would blow shofar. And then ala b'keva shupana l'smolo, he would go up the ramp and he would make an immediate left. Normally we turn to the right. Kol pnia shata pona enu elu liyamin, that we learned a couple of times throughout Shas so far. Today we're going to see that this is one of the exceptions to the rule. So that's what the Gemara says, is that you go up to the ramp and you make an immediate left. And then when you get there, what are you going to see? Shnei sapalim, you're going to see basically two bowls. Shel kesef, they're made of silver. Hayu sham, they were in that place. Rabbi Yehuda says they were not made out of silver. Rabbi Yehuda, Omer shel sid hayu, they're actually made out of some type of material, like a limestone type of material. But they look like tarnished silver because the wine had a reddish tint to it. It made it look darker, like the color that you might see on silver. That's a little tarnished, a little purplish hue, a little reddish hue. So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, not only that, umenukavim, they had holes in the bottom of them from the word nekev. Umenukavim can mean shnei chotmin dakim, similar to the way that one's nostrils are openings in the nose, and they were at the bottom of the bowls to allow the water and the wine to drain. Ve'echad me'uve ve'echad dak. One was a bigger hole for water, because water is more liquidy. Ve'echad dak, one was a little bit. The wider one was for the wine, which is more viscous. And one was a thinner one to allow for the water to drain. Why did we do this? Why did we make the holes bigger? Who cares? Says the Gemara, because that when the water libations and the wine libations were done, we wanted them to finish at the same exact time. So it says the Gemara, and we're going to speak about this more in a little bit. It says the Mishnah, top of Mem Ches Midbei, second line, Ma'aravo shel mayim, Mizracho shel yain, the one on the west, that is the one that was for water, and Mizracho, the eastern one, was of the wine. So the west is closer to the Heichal side. Ira shel mayim l'soch shel yain v'shel yain l'soch shel mayim yotze. If you happen to have poured the blood into the water basin and the water into the blood basin, the halacha is that you're still yotze. Rabbi Yehuda Omer belug haya menasech, that it was with one lug that they did the nisuch hamayim, not 3 kol shmona. And ula menasech Omer, they used to say to the person doing the nisuch hamayim, hagbeis yadcha, we want you to raise your hand and pour from a higher place. Why? What was happening? So says the Gemara, because we know, of course, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, there were some concerns about Tzedukim, about the Sadducees. Shepamachas nosach echad al gabe raglav. One person who did not believe in the Nisuch HaMayim, because it's not an explicit pasuk in Chumash, so he says, he tried to fake it, so he poured it on his feet. Al gabe raglav or gamuhu kol ha'am be'esrogim, but it took their their esrog. They give a nice little toss up, got the weight, and everybody pelted him with the esrogim one after the next. So after that, they made this takana, or whatever the appropriate terminology is, that the Kohen who was doing the nisuch had to raise his hands up and mamish pour. So everybody was able to see no esrogim were thrown anymore. And as well, halachically speaking, no difference between the nisuch hamayim on Shabbos versus weekday. But what they would do is when the nisuch hamayim was done on Shabbos, they would pre-fill a golden barrel. One that was Eina Mekudeshes. We'll see tomorrow why it was not Mekudash. Minashiloach umanicha balishka, and they kept it in a particular room. Good. The Mishnah concludes, Nishbecha Niskalsa, let's say that it spills, or let's say that it was uncovered for too long of a period of time. Hayamamali minakir, they could fill it up from the kior. Shahayayin v'hamayim megulin psulin legabe mizbech. The reason why is because when there's mayim megulin, they're not allowed to be used for the mizbech. This is something that we all know about, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Halacha L'Maisa, and seemingly today as well, that if there's water that's left out overnight, so the halacha is that we don't drink it. We can discuss this at another time, but that's a din in Shulchan Aruch. And a famous Gra there says, even though today we're not concerned for the immediate concern of whether or not there are snakes that are leaving their venom inside the water, which is an extremely unlikely occurrence, but it's still usher. And the Gra there writes, so for every one reason you see of the Chachamim, there are plenty more that you don't see. So we don't drink mayim megulim either. How do we know that this is true? How do we know that what is true? Take a look at Rashi 2/3 of the way down. Rashi says, how do we know that there's shofar by the Nisuch HaMayim? Go back to the Gemara 1/3 down at the open of the Gemara. How do we know about the shofar? Amar Rav Eina to Amar Kra, Ushav Tamayim Bisason. When you do the She'iva Samayim, it should be Bisason. And we assume that Sason is with a shofar. And then the Gemara tells a very cryptic story. You should spend some time looking into some of the commentaries, because on its face, it's a difficult story to understand. Hanhu Treimini, there were two heretics. Chad Shmei Sason. One of their names was Sason. Chad Shmei Simcha, and the other person's name was Simcha. Amar Le Sason the Simcha. Sason says to Simcha, Ana adifna minach. I'm better than you. Tichsiv, look what's first in the pasuk. Sason v'simcha yasigu. So we see that Sason is better. Amar le Simcha le Sason. Simcha says back to Sason, I don't agree with you. Ana adifna minach. I'm better than you. Tichsiv, Simcha v'Sason la Yehudim. There we see the Simchas first. Amar le Sason the Simcha Sason. He says to him, Chad Yoma shavkuch v'shavyuch parvanka. One of these days I'm going to leave you behind, and you will be nothing more than a messenger. You'll be nothing more than someone who's a runner, as Rashi highlights over here. Rashi, a little bit further down than by the opening of the Gemara, 3/4 of the way down. Divramaschel parvanka ratz larus lefanav. You're going to be the runner in front of me. Dichsiv ki v'simcha seitzeyu. With simcha, they were going to be the ones that leave. So he's going to be a parvanka messenger. Amar le Simcha lesason chad yomach shavkuch umalu bachmaya. One day, you're going to be left to be nothing, and we're going to fill you with water. So Amar le'ahu mina d'shmei Sason, the Rabbi Abo. There was a man who said, whose name was Sason. He said to Rabbi Abo, Asidisu desimlu li mayim le'alma da'asi. Soon you're going to be filling water for me in the next world. D'chsivu shavtem mayim b'Sason. And my name is Sason, so therefore you're going to be filling me with water. Now you're going to take care of me. Amar le'i havaksiv lisason kidaka amris. Had it been that it was lisason, yeah, taka, I would have agreed with you. But hashad d'chsiv bisason, now that it says in Sason, so therefore we have a different drasha. What's the drasha? Kind of gross, but the Gemara says, Mashche de'ahu gavra, the skin of this particular person, mashvina leguda, it's going to be considered like a wine container made of skin, zumalina and beimaya. So he pushes back quite sharp. Difficult to understand this Gemara. This requires a lot of commentary, maharals and maharshas and other meforshim to have an appropriate understanding of this Gemara. 2/3 of the way down, 2 lines before the wide lines, the Gemara says, Alaba kevesh upano l'smolo. Says the Gemara, an implied question. Everybody knows that when you go up to the Mizbeach, you have to go right. Kol pino shatapone, it has to be liyamin, it has to be to the right. So why are we here? We're turning left. So says the Gemara, last short line on Memches Medbei says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan kol ha'olam l'Mizbeach. Normally, when a person goes up the Mizbeach, they turn right, and when they go down, they turn left. Normally, that's what happens. Chutz, except for except for 3 things where the following happens. She'olen derech smol, you go up and you turn left. So you're going to go clockwise instead of counterclockwise. And then you immediately pivot when you're done with what you're doing. You just turn yourself around al ha'ikev on your heel. You just spin back around, and then you leave the mizbeach that way. So remember what we said in our Mishnah. You go up the mizbeach, make an immediate left on the western side of the mizbeach to go do the nisuch hamayim, and then right when you're done, you turn back around, and you're going to be facing south, and you'll walk toward the mizbeach, and then you'll come down. So it says the Gemara, these three things, two of them relevant to today, nisuch hamayim and nisuch hayayin, and as well olas ha'ov kisherabsa b'mizrach. When there's too many korbanos on the eastern side, they come over here to the western side, which is where the nisuch hamayim was. Elu hein mashchir. We're going to learn this one last little sugya, and then we'll stop. Elu shehein machshir, and we said that they are blackened. Bishlam dayan. Bishlama, the yayin mashchir. If you're going to say that these containers are made out of sid of limestone, so I could understand why they look like they were darkened. If you have wine, the one that was the wine, I understand that it's going to have that darkened look. But demaya, my mashchir, if all you're doing is pouring water in it, then why would it look darkened like tarnished silver? That doesn't make any sense. So it says the Gemara, Kevin the Amar Mar, because we know that sometimes they made a mistake. We said that ira shel mayim l'soch shel yayin v'shel yayin l'soch shel mayim yotza. We said that sometimes people make errors in where they pour things up on the mizbech. Sometimes the wine is poured into the basin for water and vice versa. So for the one time that they poured wine into the basin for where the water belonged, it would stain it, and therefore shalmayim asi le'ashchure, it would then come to darken even the one for water. Maybe it wasn't as common, but it did happen apparently, and it would have that darker color. We'll stop right here and pick up in Yiras Hashem tomorrow in person with Daf Mem Tes. Wishing you all a beautiful night.